started. My name is Vanetta James. I am the program director, chairman for the Historical Society. Miss Betty Summers is our president. She's had surgery on her eyes, so she's not going to be able to officiate this afternoon. Jerry Bybee is our vice president. He's working. He's not able to be here this afternoon. Betty McKinnon is our treasurer. She's with Bob. They're in Clarksville with a medical issue today. And Nana's the secretary. She's too busy, so I'm it. Nana's got her own job to do. We're going to start today with the pledge, and Sid McMillan is going to lead us.
Up front to the left. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Sid. Okay, minutes. If everyone should have gotten their minutes in the mail. If you didn't, see Miss Nina.
I have an error on Bob McKinnon said he got $5 a week rather than $1.
Okay.
He worked for Clarence and he was the clerk.
And I have not an error, but an addition. Nana said in the minutes about how word spread in Houston County about the change of venue of the picnic, and that's true. It does spread quickly, but I want to thank Melissa Parker especially because she did a lot of phone calling to make sure that all of our regulars knew that we were changing the location of the picnic. The sign-in sheet, you're not signing up for anything. The sign-in sheet is going around, so please be sure to put your name down so that we'll have an accurate count of how many members and visitors we have. We don't have a treasurer's report. Like I said, Betty's not here today, so we can skip on to the next one. Our next meeting is in September, is on the 13th, second Tuesday. It'll be at Erin Methodist Church, and Ann Hagler will be giving the program on the Rouser trial. It'll be at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
May I add to that?
Yes.
And didn't you say you want to add to the Baptist church because that's where all the commotion started, right?
There are different words for promotion, but yes, that was the venue.
Ann has a reason why we're meeting at the Methodist Church. Okay. Facebook. Jerry's not here, but I'll let you know. We now have 1,507 followers on Facebook, and that's a lot of credit goes to Jerry for that. Melissa's not here. She didn't sneak in, did she, to do an archival report. But the archives are doing great, just great. We got the $5,000, they got the $5,000 grant from the Tennessee State Library and Archives, and Melissa's been able to spend that money on supplies for file folders and paper and other things that sponges for cleaning the records. So she's just doing a bang-up job. The Traditions Bank display. Yesterday morning, Susan Wilshire and I changed the display. It is now on Rachel Maddox. And Susan had a lot of items, and then Kay at the library gave us a lot of items to put in the display. So y'all go by and look at the display and spread the word. And Kay also told me that Daniel O'Donnell, who was here in February, he's the young man who wrote and is singing the song about Erin, that his concert is going to be on PBS this Saturday night at 7 o'clock. And there'll be, I think they shot footage. Where's Linda? Didn't they shoot footage of Erin when they were here?
Yes, they did.
Yeah, so that's this Saturday night at 7
What's his
o'clock.
first name?
Daniel O'Donnell. And Deborah Stanzo had a couple of announcements.
I attended the Dickson County Historical Society meeting last night, since my farm is kind of almost in Dickson County and Houston and everything else. They had a very nice meeting. They are doing the plat maps, or I think that's what they call it, of the Revolutionary War soldier plots. In Tennessee, they've got 3 books. Well, actually, they've got 5 books out. I have them if you'd like to see them. The one that involves Houston County, I think, will be out about this time next year. They started like with Smith County and went west. So it's very intense, and I think it was the first person that had the Revolutionary Land Grant, not the subsequent ones. According to them, they traded land grants like they traded pocket knives. Another thing that they mentioned was the Montgomery County Archives is having an open house Thursday, August the 11th. One reference I have says 3 to 6 and the other says 4 to 6. Says the archives is located close to the library at Clarksville, so I didn't know if any of you all might be interested. It might be a backdoor entrance into the Clarksville Library because of our proximity to Montgomery County. I thought it would be interesting for, I'm planning on attending, but I'm not sure. But just let you all know that I got that going on and that's available. And these books, if y'all want to look at them, I'd be glad to let you see them. I brought them in. They're heavy, but
Okay, thank
Yeah, I had to her.
Yes.
Okay, this fella, what's his name, Masters?
yes.
Okay, he was here last week, and we were at the library, we were going over, and that booklet in the beginning of Wells and Geis's Creek has got a lot of stuff, and I had some things that he didn't have. Anyway, the library, Friends of the Library just spent $299 for the 2 big books, and they are beautiful, and the 3 supplements.
I got those.
Oh, you got them?
I've got those. I got them last night. I asked him if he had all of those, and he said yes, and I felt like I had hit the jackpot last night.
Where'd you see him last night?
Dixon County Historical Society meeting.
Oh,
They were attending, the Purrier Man and the Masters Man both were there. The
Well-
artwork in here is unbelievable.
these are at the library, but they're very expensive and they're not to be checked out. So if you want to go check and see if some of your family had a North Carolina land grant, he's covering a lot of things, and I mean,
I have a folder too if you need any information. I picked that up thinking I was going to order it, but he
go
had
to the library genealogy room and use them.
Okay, if you don't have time to see Deborah's books today, they're at the library. Does anyone else have any announcements they'd like to make?
I thought there was David Wright's work.
Yeah, and it tells about him in the back.
got a powder
Go down my list and make sure
There's a picture of a powder horn in there somewhere.
Okay, so I covered everything I had a note on. Okay, we are very fortunate today to be meeting in this historical church, and I do want to thank Linda Raji for coordinating this. And I'm not sure who to turn the program over to Derek?
I'll do it,
guess?
yeah, I guess.
So I'll turn it over.
Unless Linda wants to do
Derek's
it.
actually the one that's coordinating.
Okay, Derek,
Okay.
okay, thank you
Unless
for
Linda-
coordinating this.
For anybody that doesn't know me, I'm Derek Fryer. I know most everybody here. So on behalf of the church, I want to welcome you. The first thing I want to show you is last November, we celebrated our 125th anniversary. And myself and Tanya and the youth of the church, we kind of made a little video. It's actually 30 minutes long, but I just want you to see the first 10 minutes that really talks about the history part. And then, I can make this work. I just want you to watch about the first 10 minutes, and then I'll give you the rest of the history. This will be the history of the church, the 10-minute version.
Houston County was established by an act of the legislature of Tennessee, January 21st, 1871. It was established from a portion of Stewart, Humphreys, and Dixon counties. There was much interest in the selection of the county seat for this newly established county. 4 of the tracts of land considered were Hollister's Field, now Erin, McMillan's Farm, Arlington, Bateman Farm, and West Farm. At the election, the McMillan Farm received the most votes, and the county seat was located at Arlington.
The first court met April 3, 1871 in the Union Church at Erin Station. On October 1871, the court ordered a frame house erected at the county seat at Arlington, the cost not to exceed $1,500. Magistrates appointed J.J. Pollard, H.H. Buquo, and J.L. McMillan as a commission to draw up the plans and specifications for the courthouse as well as advertised. The contract was awarded to G.W. Buquo for the sum of $1,440. Lot number 26 on the public square was purchased, upon which to erect the courthouse. This is the lot, this is that building, and the courthouse was completed and accepted in the spring of 1872.
The first court convened in this building May 6, 1872. There were disadvantages to this location, the most important being the steep grade of the land. The trains could not stop here, making it very inconvenient for passengers trying to get to the county seat. On August 1, 1878, the decision was made to move the court from Arlington to Erie. The records were moved November 1, 1878. The courthouse at Arlington, this building, was used for a while as a school and a church, but was finally abandoned.
In September of 1885, the commissioners decided to sell this property in Arlington. Lot number 10, which was formerly the courthouse, the Arlington Cumberland Presbyterian Church. Lot number 10, as laid off by commissioners September 7, 1885. Beginning at the intersection of Church and Hill Streets, running east with Hill Street, 150 feet to G.H. Miller's line, thence south 100 feet to the corner of number 11, thence west 150 feet to Church Street, thence north 100 feet to the beginning.
The building was bought by the Arlington Cumberland Presbyterian Church. On November 22, 1885, 21 members from the Erie CP congregation, 2 from Campground congregation, and 11 on Confession of Faith became the charter members of the new congregation known as the Arlington Cumberland Presbyterian Church. 5 elders were elected and ordained, and 9 of the 11 members that came on Confession of Faith were baptized. The 5 elders ordained at this time were J.H. Pulley, G.F. Combs, W.T. McMillan, B.A. Roby, and Henry Shimwell.
In the summer, the congregation decided to acquire a bell. On motion, a resolution of thanks was adopted to wit, resolved that this church tender Brother Joe M. Harris their thanks and high appreciation for his kindness in raising monies and purchasing a bell for this church. This old bell still rings today.
Arlington, like many others, often dealt with hard times. Finding ways to raise money wasn't always easy, but God in His wisdom and kindness always provided. April 14, 1913, on motion, a committee of 5 was appointed to visit the homes of Arlington and collect chickens for the church, which were to be sold and proceeds to be used for the repairs of the church.
Repairs weren't the only thing the church raised money for. Often visiting pastors holding revivals were paid with special collections from the community. When it came to collecting, the task often fell to a pair of twins, Lola and Laura. An example of this can be found in Lola's notebook from October 1938, in which $19.71 along with were collected for a visiting pastor holding the revival. In April of 1955, the session decided to brick the facade of the church. Brother Thomas would provide the labor and the church would provide the materials.
In February 1972, a discussion was had to add to the church building approximately 500 square feet, which included 2 restrooms. That same June, a contract was signed and approved with Tommy Nichols for the addition.
December 17, 1972, the session on motion agreed to make some changes and additions in the plans of the new addition to be made to the church building. They agreed to partition a small kitchen at the end of the fellowship hall, the kitchen to have cabinets and water heater as requested by the CPW.
December 20th, 1984, a new addition to the church had just been completed. Fellowship hall, Sunday school rooms, pastor study. He accepted the building, making the final payment to Mr. Kerry Powell, the contractor.
In June 2006, a portion of the sanctuary ceiling fell. For the next 9 months, worship services would be held in the fellowship hall. The congregation met and decided to replace the ceiling with wood, and to also add new lights, paint, flooring, and sound system. Jonathan Mitchell would remove and replace the old ceilings, part of which was original to the old courthouse. For the next few weeks, the congregation met at night to stain each individual ward.
In the summer of 2010, the session decided to replace the old asphalt parking lot with concrete in preparation for homecoming. In late August, Jamie Everett had completed the new concrete parking lot.
getting ready to rehash a lot of that in more detail, but that's just, we played that, I guess we played it that day, that Sunday. We'll come make this thing here work, please. Because I have nothing to show you. So let's start back at the beginning real quick. First thing I want to talk about is this plot. There's several stories to this plot. It started with looking for a deed to the church. We didn't have a copy, so we go to the tax assessor's office. Of course, we don't show up on the tax map. We don't pay taxes, so nobody knows where the deed are. We knew we had one. There was one on file. We just didn't know where. My granddaddy, Mr. Eldred Knight, had this drawn out on a piece of notebook paper, but it made no sense to me whatsoever because it kept talking about Hill Street and Church Street. Well, to me, Hill Street's in town. I know where Hill Street's at. So I didn't think anything about it. Going through my great aunt. Anyway, she kept all the records of the church and she kept everything. In the bottom of a box, in a book, in a manila envelope, we found this. I thought it was a copy. Tanya found the original raised seal in the corner, and it is signed by J.I.J. Adams, Houston County Court Clerk, August the 27th of 1891. So then I quit touching it. And this was folded up in a, well, you can see where it's been folded.
Who was your great aunt?
Elizabeth Knight Adams. She was Aunt Lizzie to me, but you better not say that. She didn't like that. Anyway, when you get to reading, this is basically the day we paid it off in 1891. So from 1885 to 1891, I don't know if we owed the county or if we owed the bank. We owed somebody. But this is the day we actually filed it in our name, was 1891. That was the day it was paid off. And if you read, it's kind of like a bunch of lawyer talk. It actually has the cause. But in here, it actually sends you to the plat of same being found in minute book number 2 of the county court clerk's office of Houston County, minute book number 2, page 426. So me and Miss Kay, for an hour and a half, we finally find book 2, page 426. This is what's in book 2, page 426. This is something I drew on a computer, but it's basically all 15 lots, and it has Church Street, Main Street, and Hill Street on them, and it gives a description then on the opposite page of each lot. That's where this came from, beginning at the intersection of Church and Hill Street. So apparently, what we call Roby Drive now was Hill Street, and what we call Knight Street was Church Street. So it's kind of ironic to me that a church wound up being on the corner of Church Street, even when it was still a courthouse. Now, I don't know what was on the other 14 lots, because this wasn't even shown. The courthouse, it never even mentioned the building being on this lot. It just gives the call of the property, the 100 by 150, and gives you the corners. And nothing, so I have no idea what the county had up here on this hill, other than this building. Do you know, Miss Nina?
Okay, in one of those library booklets, this came from an article in the League Chronicle, and they were selling lots in Erin and Arlington someday, and it's in one of those booklets, and it has who bought what lot in Erin and who bought what lot in Arlington. Arlington lot sold for about 3 times what the Erin lot sold for. But it's in one of them, and I can't tell you.
Even after the county seat was moved?
No.
Oh, this was before. Oh, okay, before. But I mean, and I'm assuming, of course, I know where Hill Street and Church Street is now. If my measuring is right, these lots, which would be directly across the road, actually extend to the next street, what the post office sits on. So I'm assuming that's what they were calling Main Street. That's the way it is in that book. And these lots across the road here, if you measure them out originally, that actually goes down to about the railroad track. It actually stops on this side where that other little street is that parallels what used to be the railroad. So apparently they own from the top of this hill to the railroad down so far. But I could probably eventually dig it out, but I'm not a true historian. But I really don't know what these other 14 lots were all about. I do know apparently G.H. Miller's line was right back here behind the church. And don't let this road deceive you. This road actually stopped here at the back of the church until, where did Uncle Butch go? He knows.
1960s.
Sometime in the 60s. So really, Hill Street ran from basically the church to the bottom of the hill this way. So this was all the road even up to the 60s. But that's all I know about the original lot. Go on the next slide, please. Of course, this is what it looks like today, and this may be hard to see, but we've expanded and we now own across the road, which is now the parking lot. Previous, of course, it also said in the video, previous to the organization of the church, Sunday school was held here for a long time. We have an original copy of the Sunday school record from July the 1st, 1877. This was given to my granddaddy, Mr. Elder Knight, by Miss Lois McMillan Allison. I don't know her, but maybe somebody else in here does.
Yeah.
But, okay, somebody said yes. Just so you know, apparently the Knights and the McMillans and the McElroys and the Robies, apparently we're all hoarders because we have all the records. We have the original minutes in the original minute book from November the 22nd, 1885. And we have all the minutes from then till now. In fact, I'll show you some of them and look when we go in there. Go to the next slide. Of course, that's just a scanned copy of them. But as it said, on November the 22nd, 1885, was the organization of what we know now as Arlington Cumberland Presbyterian Church. The meeting was moderated by the Reverend A.J. Allison. You also heard it said there were 21 members that transferred from the Erin congregation down to Erin Church. So I'm going to give you those names now, see if you know any of these. And they used a lot of initials back in the day, I guess, because nothing has full names. S.E. McMillan, N.C. McMillan, Betty McMillan, John Shimwell, J.E. Shimwell, T.V. Shimwell, Lucy Shimwell. I have noticed if they were a child, they went ahead and used their name. J.K. Bone, Barney Wallace, R.E. Connell, A.B. Connell, J.H. Pulley, W.H. Terrell, M.E. Terrell, G.F. Connell, Alice Connell, B.A. Roby, S.M. Slaughter, W.T. McMillan, L.S. McMillan, and E.A. Nichols. So those were the ones that actually transferred their membership from the Erin Church to Arlington when it started. 2 transferred, in the original minutes it says from Wells Creek congregation, which we know now as Campground. So if you hear Wells Creek or Campground, that's actually the same church. It did change names over time. And that was S.E. Knight and L.E. Knight. And then these names joined the church that day on profession of faith. M.B. Slaughter, G.W. Knight, William Henry Nichols, W.V. Pulley, Russ Buchanan, Sally A. Miller, Georgia Florence Connell, G.W. Slaughter, William Henry Shimwell, M.J. Pulley, and E.C. Roby. So those are the original, I think I called off 33. Those are the original 33 or 34 members of this church. And I'll give anybody that wants a copy of all these names, just anytime, just let me know. Go to the next slide, Will. This is kind of a rehash, but if you remember the video talking about the bell, they got a bell in 1886. I don't know if it was new, used. All it says in the minutes is they thank Mr. Joe M. Harris for getting the bell and putting it up.
Joe M. Harris.
Mm-hmm. If you want to hear it ring, we'll ring it, because we still ring it every Sunday. It's the same bell. So if it was an old bell to begin with, it's a really old bell now. But we do, we still, Mr. Bateman back there in the back, if he pulled the rope hard enough, we still ring it every Sunday before church. So the bell still works, and it's still the same bell. At different times, during its time, you heard it talk about being used for a schoolhouse. The first time I found in our church records was June the 5th, 1889. It says the session agreed to let the church be used for a school. This was the first time we found it recorded in our church minutes since Arlington was a church. I'm sure they used it for a school before that some too. Let me just keep moving up. I'm just going to keep moving on in dates, and eventually we'll get to the day. In March of 1902, the church was reorganized. The name didn't change, the denomination didn't change. I really don't know what changed. All I know is you had to tell an elder of the church between March and June that you wanted to remain on the church roll and still be a member. Best I can tell, that was all it amounted to. And it may have been something they didn't want anybody to know about. I don't know. It was reorganized in 1902. Go to the next one. I brought this back up, not just for church history, but for time of era history in 1913. We're talking about getting donations of chickens from the people in Arlington and then selling them and using the money, I'm sure, to fix the roof or fix something. First off, how many chickens could we find in Arlington today? And second, if we had them, what would we do with them? But this kind of tells me of the times. You know, everybody had chickens, so if you went around to each house and got one chicken, I don't know how many chickens you could get, donated, but I'm sure then they went back and sold them. But I left this slide to bring this up again as kind of a piece of history for that era in 1913. I could imagine there was probably a lot of chickens between here and town. I imagine every little house probably had chickens. They probably had eggs and, they had dumplings just like we do today, except instead of going to Claggers, they went out back. So chickens were very valuable still, even back then. Go to the next slide, Rick. This is the oldest picture we have of the church. And the picture I made this copy off of, I forgot who, some member of my family has it. But it has 1922 on the back. So that's the oldest picture I have. It's 1922. You're basically standing back up towards the nursing home, just a little piece kind of looking back at us this way. This is the front door. The actual shape of the church, of course we've added on, but the original building, the bell tower even still looks basically the same in all the pictures, except for a new top's been put on it a couple of times. And that is somebody's, it's hard to tell in that picture, but that is a buggy with a horse tied to the tree. Right here. It's kind of a little tree. Now keep that little tree in mind, because the next picture we jump to, the tree is going to be a great big tree. But this is the oldest picture we get, and I don't know of anybody that's got a picture older than 1922. I know, was it Mr. Lovelady that has the book? Did he do it? I saw it at the library. We had Mr. Lovelady written on it. He had the same picture in his book, and he had it dated 1922. So that's the oldest picture we have, and if anybody's got one any older, I'd sure like to see it. I'd like to have a copy of it.
Well, that picture is 89 years old. Because that's when I was born.
That's when you were born? Did you take this picture, Miss Becky?
Do you know where Charles got a lot of those pictures? Miss Laura and Lola, when they...
Well, see, that's probably where eventually we got the picture.
Whoever, maybe escaping on some toes, but whoever was selling the last estate, this house, they took a whole mess of it to the dump. And Charles, somebody at the dump called him, and he went out there and got a lot of stuff.
Well, I've got this picture. Somebody in my family's got this picture. I don't remember who it was. That's where I got that one from. Back to more of the times. Around this same time, it says 1922. In the church minutes, it says in 1920, each member of the session was appointed janitor for one Sunday each month to make the fire and light the lamps. Well, see, to me, I find that interesting. because we walk in and turn on a light switch. I never would have thought about getting to church early and stoking the fire up and lighting all the lamps. Done that. In the 1930s, oh, Mr. Sid,
You tell me that's your first picture of the church.
that I have, that's the oldest picture I have, that's in 1922.
Do you know or anyone else know of earlier picture of the courthouse?
I don't think there is a picture of the courthouse, because everybody's been looking for one for years, hasn't it?
I have no, I've never seen.
That's why I say this is as far back as, this is as old as I've got, and I think as old as anybody's got this picture, 1922. We was talking about a while ago about the schoolhouse. In the 30s, I found in our minutes again where it said the session agreed to let the church be used for a school while Arlington Elementary was being tore down and rebuilt. It didn't say what I found. I think it was 1933, Ms. Nye. And I'm assuming that may have been the last, what we call the senior citizens building. It's still standing. I guess the original part of that would have probably been built in the 30s. I don't know. But that's what it said I can tell you who the teachers were. This was in the church minutes also. The teachers at that time were Miss Olive McMillan and Miss Gertha Brooks. Does that ring a bell? Does that ring a bell to you, Miss Betty? Miss Olive McMillan and Miss Gertha Brooks?
Both of them. I was trying to tell you too that I was born in Arlington. When I was telling you.
Where were you born? Just out of curiosity.
The house is not here.
Oh, okay.
Not a house that I ever lived in or was born in or anything. It's still living, but the one in Tennessee Ridge.
Okay.
And if it was real cold or raining, this is a relative of mine, Cousin Gertha, there was, the hill engine would go to Tennessee, go to Stewart about the time that she walked from here up to Arlington, and she'd ride the hill
It's
engine.
a hill engine.
They'd let her off up here, and he'd go on to Tennessee Ridge.
What else did I find? Oh, also in the 30s, Mr. J.F. McElroy, he was at that time selling insurance with the National Life and Accident Insurance Company. And he was a personal friend of the president at that time, which was Mr. Craig. And when Mr. McElroy took the Sunday school class on a picnic to Nashville, the quartet, and it didn't say what quartet, it just said the quartet, and the children were allowed 15 minutes to sing on WSM radio. Well, in the 30s, somebody singing on the radio would be like us being on CNN now. I mean, that was all they had was the radio. So you could imagine, we would think today it would be a big deal if a church group, got on CMT or something like that and sang. Well, that was probably the same kind of deal back to them, back in the 30s, to be on WSM radio. Swap slides, if you will, one more time. This is kind of rehashing, again, talking about donations and such as that. The video kind of skipped when he was talking about Miss Lola and Laura. I've got, here it is. I drove this out. When he was talking about her collection book from 37 and 38, this is it. This was in a box, stuck in a book like everything else. And that's where a lot of that came from. But, let's see, let me find the page we used in the video. It said it raised $19 and something, and then it skipped. The other part of that was 60 cans of fruit. So apparently we were paying a pastor to hold a revival for $19, and he was going to have fruit for the next 6 months. That seemed to be the plan. But there's a lot of times in here where it's not just all collecting for a pastor, it was collected for the light bill. And you can see, this was, here we go, like March the 13th, 1938. It has names on one side and it has donations on the other. And this 10, 5, and 25, I learned real quick when you add them up at the bottom, that is not dollars. That is cents. So that particular day, or that particular round she made, she wound up with $5.70. It doesn't say exactly. Well, over here, I hadn't seen this one before. last of year from 1937, it says salary, I'm assuming that was the pastor's salary, $125.41. So he was working pretty cheap at that time. But that again is, I mean, I know it's a piece of church history, but it's also history of the time. Even in the 30s, people were, you know, fruit was as important as a dime as far as food goes. In April of 1949, I put this in because this man was an elder for a long time. It says new pews were built and installed by longtime elder Mr. Carl White. I think, don't we still have one of those? Is that the one downstairs? Would that have been one he built? That wasn't, was it?
No, we sold them all to another church.
Okay, all of the pews Mr. White built. But in 1949, he built new pews. Well, let me see the next picture. Not sure when this picture was taken exactly, but as you can see, there's still no big tree, and everything behind the church, which would have been back here, there's a fence and a great big field. So all that was still apparently farm of some sort behind the church. I would think, I mean, I'm not a tree person, and it really doesn't get out far enough to see that tree, but this is probably not much later than 22, with the size of the tree and the way the land looks then and now. Oh, this is, me and Miss Nina talked about this earlier. April the 26th, 1951. A building committee was appointed for a new roof and to straighten the building after storm damage. Go to the next picture, Will. This is a modern day picture. This is actually when it fell on us in 2006. It's kind of hard to see.
Was that snow that caused it to cave in?
This time in 06 or back then?
No, in 51.
No, it just said storm damage. What actually happened was, I believe it was wind. Uncle Butch has seen a picture, and I have too, and I wish I could have found it and put it up here today. The church building was actually leaning. It was being held up with poles. Now this is my engineering education here. I'm going to give you my opinion on something. If you look, the original ceiling to the courthouse was as high as the middle of this is now. And when we tore it apart in 06, the old part of the ceiling that was still there was on each side, out here where the parts come down. That are these big braces. I believe, the best I can tell, and from being up there, in 1951 when they straightened the church, these were put in more like braces to hold the church up straight. Now I don't know that for sure, but that's my guess. I believe every time before that, when you would have walked in this building, it would have been a flat ceiling all the way across. But it almost fell over in 1951. Or I'm assuming it probably fell over sometime right before 51, because this was in April. But, you know, it could have been just straight line winds, but there is a picture somewhere of big poles holding the church up. It almost fell over. Let's see, we'll go to the next one. Oh, yes. My mama would probably kill me because I showed a picture of the basement. But before we get to the basement, another little note in history here. On December the 14th, 1952, Mr. J.F. McElroy, after serving the church faithfully in many capacities, was elected superintendent. Oh, me, Miss Nina will know that she didn't teach me very well. Emeritus, is that how you say that, Miss Nina? Emeritus, forever?
Yeah.
Okay. Just a quick note of history there. Mr. J.F. McElroy, he was Sunday school superintendent, he was an elder, he was a fix-it man, he pretty much did a lot of things. Let me move a little bit further ahead. June the 28th, 1953, the basement was made into classrooms. So sometime right before 53, they hand dug, there's a basement under what we're sitting on. sometime right before 1953, they hand dug a basement under this building. And if you're 6'4" and walk down, you will understand that they stopped when they hit something pretty solid. Because it's about 6'3" in the basement. But now, what's in the basement is we use it for storage. But even I can remember, before we did all the additions, the basement being, it's kind of hard to say, but you're kind of looking, if you were standing at these steps, looking back towards me, where this pole is and this back wall, all of that was a wall, and that was pretty much, I guess they had a few parties down there, a pastor's study, his office, and then everything on this side, all the way back, was just classroom. You went from one classroom to the next classroom to the next classroom. But sometime right around early part of 53, they actually, 50 to 53, they dug a basement. And then in June of 53, they actually went down there and made it into the classroom. But I would hate to know I'd have to hand dig a basement under a building. And it pretty much runs the length of this whole room. So you can imagine digging something out as long as this room we're in, as wide as this room we're in, and a little over 6 foot tall by hand with a shovel. And pretty much hauling it out by hand.
What did you do at the ones? They didn't find any?
Well, they stopped when they got to the biggest one, I can tell you that now, because I'll hit my head if I go downstairs.
How long did it take them to do that?
I don't know. Do you know Uncle Butch?
I had no idea.
I don't either.
I was still fairly young then.
Yeah, Uncle Butch was still young then. There is a walkway from the back of the basement out the back of the church that was done, and I'm assuming they did it at the same time. I'm assuming it may have been dug pretty early as a way to carry the dirt out the back without having to come up through the building. Yes,
So
Miss Amy?
where did the dirt go?
It's not here. I don't know. It'd be several yards of dirt. I mean,
A lot of dirt.
just thinking, especially digging, I just hate to know I had to dig it with a shovel. Because, it was dug with a pick and a shovel. But back in the 50s, they were a whole lot tougher than I am now. Go to the next one real quick, Will. This is also from the early 50s. Also in 1953, the church bought a bus. Mr. Elmer Cathy, he not only painted the bus, and he drove the bus, he also furnished the gas for the bus for the first year that the church had. And I don't know if that's Mr. Elmer Cathy right there or not. Somebody, can you see it?
I can't recognize it.
Okay, I don't know if that's Mr. Elmer Cathy standing there or not. And I'm sure somebody knows who all these people are. I got this picture from Miss, Miss Jane Parchman, was Miss Jane Ross. She had this picture, and she let me scan it before we had our homecoming. But that was also in 53. Picture wheel. In 1954, we bricked the church. And you saw that on there where Brother Thomas provided all the labor and the church bought all the materials. Now back to my tree. There's a tree. Now I'm not sure this picture was from 54, but it couldn't have been long after 54. But now our tree all of a sudden is 30 foot tall. Also in that same year, I learned this just by when the ceiling fell and we took the little ceiling out in the foyer. This foyer was added about the time they bricked the church. So the first little entranceway you walked in, that was added about 1954 when they bricked the church. Now I can barely remember, and when we jump to the next slide, you'll know what year I was born in. I can barely remember the church being just this room, without the two fellowship halls as we call them now.
Derek, you said Thomas, was that brother A.L. Thomas?
Yes,
that used to preach?
Yes, sir, it was.
Okay.
And his house is where the beauty shop, where Tammy Dowdy is. That was where Brother Thomas lived. That was his home. And
Now we're getting far enough up in history, people. remember stuff.
That's where he
We're
lives.
getting further up the list
The
now.
one that Bonnie Newberry painted blue.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, that's where he lived.
Now, he served several other churches
Oh,
at the
yes.
same time.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about
He
that.
would hire a taxi, when we had a taxi in there, to take him to Locust Grove. And he would preach at Locust Grove, and then he would preach here too.
He preached the campground too.
Preached at campground, and, he was at, what was that other place I saw? And he was in Springfield at some time or other, Mount Denson.
Let me see. All right, we'll go to the next slide, please, real quick. Of course, this is a modern day picture, but in 1958, the best I can tell, that's when we got the stained glass windows. Does that sound right? That's what it said in the minutes. It just said 1958, we got these stained glass windows. We have to take real good care of them. Every time we build a door, like where that door is, it used to be a stained glass window. We kept them to replace them because I'm sure finding glass and they probably wasn't new when we got them.
Yeah,
They were new?
they were cut.
Okay, they were cut. So we have about one lower pane left I think we're actually out of the blue. But, you know, over the years since 1958, anytime one has been broken, we've used that one window back there to take it apart and replace it. What else happened? In 59, our good old bus left and they got a station wagon. And then they carried on that same service. I think it ran through like 63, I believe is when they quit running either a bus or a station wagon altogether. Oh, 1968, the session voted to buy a lot and build a manse. Church no longer owns that. Let me tell you where it was. It was up on the hill in Arlington. If you're going yonder way, it was on the left, white brick house. It was before you get to where Mr. Irely Osbrooks lives. Directly across the road from where Mr. Irely Osbrooks lives. There's a white brick house. That was the manse that the church built. If I read the deed right, it says that, of course, the session voted to buy a lot and build a manse. If I read the deed like Mr. Deck Gray donated that lot, so that's another big reason why it is where it is. Mr. Deck Gray was a longtime member of the church, and he actually just donated that lot to the church, and then the church built a manse on it.
At that time, he lived right beside where we built it,
Yeah,
in that brick house.
because I noticed, we do have a deed for that one in hand, and I noticed where it was just a transfer for $0. In March of 1970, the Reverend Roy Henderson was called to be pastor, and he will live in the new manse. So he was the first pastor to live in the new manse. But still, remember this is one thing I want to put in your mind because we're going to talk about it later. Even though he lived in the manse, he was still not a full-time minister even in 1970. I don't know if Roy Henderson. I don't know if he was still preaching at other churches too, or if he was just part-time here.
Preached here and campground.
Was he still at both at that time? Because we're going to talk about sharing pastors in just a little bit. Will, the next slide, please. This is the outside picture of the church. You heard about the video talking about in 1972 when we added the first, I'm going to call it the first fellowship hall because that's what I've always called it all my life, which is what's directly on the other side of this wall, which you saw the ladies of the church came back and said, wait a minute, we want a kitchen. So they got a little kitchen that's just big enough for a counter, some cabinets, a sink, just a little water heater. It's still small, but we still use it anytime we want to feed anybody. But this is what it looked like then. The first big tree is now gone. We cut down the first big tree. This is actually a second big tree a little further out. But this is mostly what I remember because this was in sometime in 72. So I'd have been 3 years old. Like I said, I can barely remember ever being in here without the fellowship hall. I knew this for a long time. Go to the next one, Will. 1973, we finished the parking lot across the road. Of course, this was even taken after that. But this still shows there was a little store that sat directly across from the church. For years, my grandmother and granddaddy ran it, and then...
Daddy built it.
Yeah. My granddaddy built it. Mr. Roe Nichols was the last one to actually run it as a store up into the 60s, 70s, up into the 70s maybe, sometime in there. I guess the last true business was Mr. Stanley Shelton had a TV repair place. And then eventually the church bought it and we expanded our parking lot. This was probably taken, let me see, I'm sure there's a little Ford Ranger. I'm trying to figure out. This was taken probably in the early 80s right here. But when they talk about completed the parking lot, it would have been like from that end of the parking lot back to just the front edge of the church across the road, because the little store was still standing at that time. It sat pretty much directly across the road. And earlier when I was talking about up until the 60s, this street did not go all the way through. It actually dead-ended right here at the store and at the church. It was a dead-end street. Go to the next one, Will. In 1977, the session granted permission to the CPW to solicit funds for new pews and carpeting in the sanctuary. And then it goes on to say, in September, the CPW ordered all the new oak furniture for the second. So in 77, they got all new oak furniture. That's what you're sitting in now. CPW did that in 77. These are what I remember to be the old pews that were painted. So this was before 77 sometime. This is kind of what my earliest remembrances of the church were. They were kind of a cream colored paint, and occasionally a nail did work out if you wiggle too much. But that was in 77. We got the furniture that you're sitting in now. Go on one more. Okay, this is now back to the pastors. Until 1979, Arlington often shared a pastor with either, and I'm going to use the local churches. I know there were probably times a pastor went, out of town and preached for somebody else, but for the most, it was either with the Erin Church or the Wells Creek / Campground Church. And I'm talking, the first one I found for sure was like August the 31st, 1903. Arlington and Erin sessions in joint meeting called Brother George L. Johnson as pastor. So, as far back as 1903, the Erin Church and Arlington Church were still sharing a pastor. And I don't know if it was early in the morning, late in the afternoon, or every other Sunday, or how that was worked out. I'm sure it was different at different times.
Usually it was like every other Sunday.
Because when I was little, I can remember we would have Sunday school every Sunday. And then we would actually have worship service with a preacher, like the first and the third, and maybe the fifth, or every other fifth, or something to that effect. Again, in December 21st, 1906, this really took a lot to pull off to get 3 churches to agree. A joint meeting of Erin, Wells Creek, and Arlington sessions called Brother S.A. Sadler to preach until the Clarksville Presbytery could meet later in March. So at that particular point in time, the Erin Church, the Wells Creek / Campground Church, and Arlington was all sharing a pastor for a short time there. May of 62, Arlington and Campground. So, Mr. Charlie, you know exactly when Wells Creek became Campground?
No, I don't.
All I know is it was sometime between 1906 and 1962. I know that's not much help, that's 60 years, but because in 62 it actually says Arlington and Campground, called Reverend E.C. Shepherd as pastor. Then in 65, Arlington and Campground called Reverend Roy Henderson as pastor. But beginning April the 1st of 1979, Arlington Church hired its first, quote, full-time pastor. And that was this man. It may be hard to see, but this is Reverend Von Fultz. So this was sometime around 1979, 1980. This picture was actually taken up here at, I don't know if that's Lola and Laura's or Miss Betty Sue's. I think it's Lola and Laura's. It looks awful close to the church. It could be Miss Betty Sue Douglas is up here. But it was actually, this is actually the church way back here in the background. But it was basically taken up here kind of across from the nursing home. But that was in 1979.
Give me his name.
Von Fultz, Fults.
Z.
Z.
Derek, that switch in names could have come about at a time when Clarksville Presbytery was discharged.
And everybody went
come
to
under
Nashville.
Presbytery.
That would have been.
I'm not sure.
That'd been like in the 50s or 60s.
No, it'd be later.
No, it'd be later than that.
See, I was just wondering, because like, what did I say a while ago? In 62, the church minutes actually call it campground. And then I think as far up as I got was like in the 40s, where it mentioned Wells Creek. So sometime maybe between the 40s and the 60s, it went from being Wells Creek to campground.
I don't remember when Clarksville Presbytery was dismissed and Nashville took over. I don't remember that.
Next slide, Will, please. 1984, we built what I'm going to call the second fellowship hall, which you'll be able to tell because you're going to go, when you look on the back side or the inside of this room, you'll see a brick wall that's been painted. That was the original outside of the church. When you go to the next room, you can look back and see another brick wall. But so basically, this is the original building here. Then we added the first fellowship hall, and then we added this part, which basically has classrooms and a great big eating area. Has a pastor's office. That was done in '84. Up until '84, we were still using the basement. So the biggest part of my childhood, up almost through high school, we still had Sunday school class in the basement. So this is pretty much what it looks like today. We've added a sign or done a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but this is basically the shape of the building today. August the 7th, 1985, the session voted to present a plaque to Miss Lola Knight in appreciation for her long and faithful service as the church pianist. She was honored by the church by being named pianist emeritus. I'm going to get that word right. Yeah, that means forever. And I have no idea how long Miss Lola was the pianist here. As long as I could remember, at least through that date. Do you know, Mama? As long as you can remember?
As long as I can remember.
So it's been a long time. We know that. In October of that same year, 1985, the Arlington Church celebrated its 100th birthday. So we had a 100th birthday celebration in 1985. And that's where a lot of these little things, like the chickens, that was already written down. Granddaddy had already gone through and found a lot of that stuff for me. So he did a lot of my work. Okay, we'll go to the next one. I'm going to go back to this. In 2006, in case y'all want to know, right where Miss Bell said, this is Miss Scotty Booker, Miss Wanda Fazell, and Miss Linda Bracci's seat. Right in here. This is exactly where the ceiling fell. Now, I'll let you figure out why the ceiling fell, where they sit. That is their seat. And that is where the ceiling fell. But it actually fell during the week. Before the ceiling fell, there was the original church ceiling, which we already talked about. It's wood. Then, of course, the shape it was in now, it had some white paper, cardboard-looking stuff. I mean, I've seen it in houses before. It looks like tiles, but it's actually some kind of paper product. And then, I guess in the 80s, we put a little drop ceiling and kept the same shape of the church. But anyway, that failed. We had a storm. We had some roof leaking. It decided to fall. So what are we going to do? We ripped everything out. We still have part of the original wood ceiling. And in fact, Miss Kay French has part of it. We gave her a little piece down at the library. She still has part of the original wood ceiling, and we kept part of it. That was in 2006. Go to the next one, Will. And of course, you see what it looks like today. In the part of the video where it says we met for several weeks to stain each board, you cannot buy a tongue and groove ceiling that's pre-finished. It comes plain. And Jonathan Mitchell tore it all out and framed it back. I went to Thomas Lumber Company in Waverly and we bought all of this. And at night we would start and stain all we could stack in here till it dried. We'd move it and do it again. It probably took about 3 weeks to stain all this, but it was actually stained on the ground before it was put up. That was in 06. Go to the next one, Will. Then, of course, most recently, on November the 14th, 2010, we just had, last November, we had our 125th anniversary celebration. Is there one more slide, Will? There it is. I think it's just a slide of, we had a pretty good crowd that day, apparently. They got to see the full version of the video, which after the part you saw, it was mostly just pictures that we had everybody from the church bring in and we scanned. It's just music and pictures. So if you want to see yourself, when you were little and you were cute like I was, because I was in several of them, you might want to go back, but it's about 30 minutes long. And that pretty much brings us to where we are today. Is there anything I missed that you all know? Oh, I got plenty more. Of course, if anybody's interested, if you want to see if you can find somebody you know, or you want to look up somebody, I'm going to lay this book in there so when you go and have refreshments. But if you'll start right here, this is starting in 1885. Has all the members of the church. Ain't Elizabeth, better say her name right. She would go back through all the old minutes in the rolls. But I think it quits at 1986. But from 1885 to 1986, you can find anybody that was a member of the church. And where she knew, she tells you over here when they died, like, when their name came off the roll, it was usually due to a death, or they transferred to Alabama, or they married so-and-so and who that son is. So if anybody wants to, this will be laying in there. Something else I've got in there for you to look at, just please don't touch, is we have the original minute book from November the 22nd, 1885. It's not in good shape, but we still have it. And like I said before, apparently we don't throw anything away because we have all the minutes of every session meeting for 125 years. We have them here. So that's all I have. Does anybody have? Y'all probably know more about the history than I do. I'm not a historian. Y'all probably know more about the history than I do. I would like to know someday what those other 14 lots had on them. Questions about it? Oh, no.
Can we hear the bell? Butch do it. Let Butch do it.
Butch is the master.
I'll let Butch pull it.
just
The only
right.
problem with this bell is this.
It will flip.
If you pull it too hard, it flips over. And once it flips over, you have to crawl up through that hole, through another trap door, and you have to physically manhandle that bell and turn it back over. So you don't want to really do that.
You just have to be, he's got the touch. I've never heard one like that. It's not Sunday, is it? Sunday's 11. He brings it.
There used to be a fire alarm in Tennessee Riggs. We have had people when Miss Susie Nance, who lived right across the road, she would come out and turn the heat on in the wintertime or the air conditioning on. And we had people calling her because she rang at about 9:30 and threatened her. Don't ring that bell, you woke me up. So she came back out and rang it again.
We ring it every Sunday at 11.
Thank you. Where is my sign-in? Here? Notebook? Oh, okay.
And Derek, is Will going to do us a commercial on our cookbook for sale?
I've already sold a cookbook.
We need to sell a lot of cookbooks.
We'll have to do a commercial.
My paper, I don't have my, we have cookbooks for sale if anybody wants one. They're what, $12 a piece? They have recipes from over the years, people that you know, people that you might know you don't want to know, people that you may not know you're related to, anything from good eating cake to armadillo stew, or roadkill stew, armadillo got everything in that book. And it's good.
Plus, the first part of it gives a brief history.
Brief
like
history
we
of the
did,
church is in the
Like,
first part of the book.
like Derek did. So there is a brief history in the front of the cookbook as well.
If you wanna look, we
They're
have,
laying back on the
we
table.
have a few laying right here, if you just wanna open them up and look
They
at
say
it.
their selling point is, it's in a 3-ring binder, so like if you have recipes at home that you want to add to, or you can just pop it open and do a 3-hole punch and you can add to them.
Where'd you get it printed?
Well, you know I didn't have nothing to do with cooking.
What?
Where were they printed on?
Fund Craft.
Fund Craft. Fund, F-U-N-D,
F-U-N-D.
Craft,
In Tennessee.
somewhere in Tennessee.
Not far away.
They did not ask me to help with cookbook. For some reason, I didn't get picked for that job.
But he has recipes.
I have a recipe in there, but they didn't ask me to do much with cookbook. Is there anything else? Any other questions?
Derek, you might mention, ever since they dug the basement, we always had water problems.
Yes.
I mean, we could go down there and we would have to actually bail the water out. And we tilted the road, built it up so the water would go that way. That didn't help.
Wasn't coming from the road.
We dug a ditch so it would go that way. That didn't help. Finally got B&B, whatever it is, out of Nashville down here. They came in and looked around, and you would not believe that hard-packed ground down below there, up on top of this hill, the water was coming up through the floor. Up through the floor.
We thought for years it was coming in like the side, like off the street, through the walls, but it was actually coming up through the floor. So they did some work, and it actually has a sump pump in one corner down there now. They dug a channel, cut part of the basement concrete out anyway. But yeah, I wouldn't have never thought water would be coming up through the ground on top of this hill. But it comes up through the floor. Yes, ma'am.
Was Brother Thomas a preacher here at this church? Was he at the Cumberland Presbyterian Church in Erin?
I'm sure he was at one time.
I know that my mother and father-in-law got married at his house on Main Street, and I know that she went to the church in Erin, so.
Well, you know, like I was saying, we often shared pastors, especially here in Erin and campground. All, I mean, from pretty much beginning till end.
Sometimes it was who's available too, because
Yes.
Mother and Daddy, of course, went here all his life, and they were married in the Methodist parsonage in here. So it's kind of who's available at the time.
I was trying to think.
My parents were married by that same Brother Thomas,
Brother Tom.
1923,
At his house?
at his house near.
I don't know if he was hired at New Hope, but he did preach.
He did preach there too. So he was a busy man. But I didn't know he lived in town.
Yeah, he lived there on Main Street.
Anybody?
Which town?
Yes, ma'am.
Next door to Dr. Davis.
Yeah, next door to Dr. Davis.
I bet he did. I'm sure he did.
You didn't know he lived in which
That's
town?
the color of your house, the two old Baxters.
I didn't know he lived down there. I didn't know that house.
Brother Thomas lived there
Yeah.
from the time
I
before.
knew Virgin had a house.
We were
There's several towns
children,
nearby.
these two old Baxters walked down in the house.
Has anybody got
Old hotel and eat.
a map
And they
of
walked.
quote Arlington back
And they went down
this
to
time
dinner, they had on
that actually
black
shows
seats and a black
Hill
hat.
Street? See, the only reason I found Hill Street, Church Street, was because it was in
They
the,
had an
in the
umbrella on
cause.
their arm and they walked us.
Ms. Nina may correct me, but in some of the Historical Society publications, the history books, the picture, the one we call the pictorial history book, there are some sketches of the layout of Arlington. Especially the lime kiln works of how the people that worked at that facility, where different ones lived. And I know I have seen that in some of their publications. I don't know just exactly which one.
I was just looking for something that actually had Hill Street and Church Street being here.
Well, that
You know,
may be
on
part
the
of
road.
the sketch, but,
Because if I read their sketch right, which the map works, Main Street is what now runs by the post office, goes to the top of the hill.
Named Church Street, but it wasn't.
Wasn't the church here? I don't know. See, when me and Miss, of course I told you I had that picture that Granddaddy had sketched out on a piece of notebook paper. Well, when I saw Hill Street, I thought, well, that's downtown. Never thought anything about it. And then one day, me and Miss Kay ran around down in the library for 2 hours. And we actually found this the first time, the picture, but it had Church Street and Hill Street. Well, she was like me. She said, Hill Street's in town. But when you actually sit down and read the calls on describing all 15 lots, of course, the one that describes our lot uses Church Street, Hill Street, and it actually is penciled in this way. And then G.H. Miller must have owned everything from the back of this church for however far.
All the way up Midgate Drive.
Because he owned everything behind us, belonged to everything had Mr. G.H. Miller's line on all these lots.
another thing about the layout of the lots, if you go up these streets here in Arlington, if you notice what's left of the rock walls and all, and that is all part of the limestone that came off these blocks, and it was placed there per lot.
Right.
Is the boundary thing. Some of those still exist, and a lot of those places up and down there.
You'll see, if I do my math right, which, you know, trying to find, of course, I really don't know where the corner of our lot is. I'm just assuming Mr. C's wall is pretty close over here, you know, but if you come off of that, lot 10 is what the church is on. Lot 11 is actually the vacant lot between us and where Miss Reeves used to live, next door. She would be lot 12, and then that lines up with that alley that goes through, you know, that way. And then, of course, these 3 lots would be right across the road. And then lot 1 through 4 would be even across the road from that. Of course, these lots all make, if you do the math on these lots, they pretty much run from the back of the church to the bottom of the little hill right here. But I pulled a tape measure here. I want to see how far, if you use the call that they gave you in the minute book, it pretty much makes it to the street at the bottom of the hill that parallels the railroad. Which would have made sense to me if I'm going to put a courthouse up on this hill. I might want to own the property between here and the railroad where people are going to get off. But I don't know what was on any of those other. Like I said, this, even back then, all it gave was the description of the lot. It didn't say it had a building on it. You know, we just know that it had a building on it. So there could have been a building on every other lot, or some of the lots could have and some of them could not have.
I have a question I'd like to ask the Arlington people. My grandmother on my mother's side was a Holly before she married. Do you all know of any Hollies? Not Hollis, Holly.
Hang on just a second, I can look.
Don't know any.
I know I had seen it there.
I don't remember seeing any, but that doesn't mean I didn't overlook it.
Well, thank you, Derek.
Yes, ma'am.
Appreciate that very much, and we are dismissed for.
Yeah, there's refreshments. We start walking. Skip the, go to the new